Hi there, I am Ved and welcome to my channel Techie Ved. Today we are going to talk about software development lifecycle. So this is one of the basics of software development which is important for all the developers, all the testers, every other stakeholder that is related to software development. This video will talk about the basics of SDLC, what is SDLC basically, what are the approaches to it, and what are all the different phases. There will be other videos in this series. You can know more about all of those in the next videos. Let's quickly jump in to the today's video and see what is SDLC. So what is SDLC? SDLC can be said as a process which is followed for developing any information solutions for your clients. So it acts basically as a framework or a guidance material for for a software development to go through different phases so that the aim of SDLC is fulfilled. What is the aim? So we aim to create high quality software which feeds into the customer and takes the customer's satisfaction to the highest level. It is imperative to always keep quality in mind whenever you are developing a software. All right, what does it help with? So SDLC helps software service providers to talk in the lines of what are the cost and time implications for a development that they are doing. Okay, we now understand what SDLC is. So what are the next things? Okay, so what are the approaches now? Okay, so there are two approaches to SDLC. The first one, predictive approach, and the second one is adaptive approach. So what is predictive approach and adaptive approach? As the name suggests, you might have already got it. So the predictive approach tries to predict everything ahead of the cycle, while adaptive approach is slightly open and it can change through time. So predictive approaches would have this assumption that all the cost, all the scope and timelines are known upfront before you start the project. For example, in your case, like classic waterfall model, and adaptive approaches being iterative and incremental in the development cycles. So they are open. They do understand the cost involved, but they are not too stringent on it. And if there are any changes that are required for the customer at any given point of time, they are open. For example, your Scrum. So these are two approaches now. What happens in the SDLC? What are the stages in the SDLC itself? Let's quickly jump on and take a look. So most of the learning material you look outside, you'll see 6 stages that are being talked about. I'm adding one more. This is based on my own experience from many years now, and I'm talking about 7 stages in SDLC. So the first one would be the project planning, then requirements analysis and gathering, and then your design, your implementation, quality assurance, deployment, and maintenance. Now let's go in through each of those phases and talk about what are the inputs to a phase and what are the outputs from it. Starting off with project planning. So as I said, project planning, most people don't consider it as a different phase, but it is indeed a separate phase. Project planning is let's say is a kickoff of the entire project. This involves your sales teams getting in touch with the client teams to understand what are the basic requirements and stuff like that. I mean, like, not from an application standpoint, but from the overall project standpoint. And this is where you do the feasibility analysis to understand, is it feasible for you? Does the cost yield you benefits or not? So now quickly look at what are the inputs here. The inputs here start out as the types of the project, the mode of the project, and budget. So you may have a question on what is the type of a project. So is it a full-scale development or is it an enhancement to a product that is already existing? And from a mode of the project standpoint, are we talking whether it is a fixed price project or is it a time and materials kind of project where it can change over time based on more materials that are acquired and implied in. And then you'll also understand the budget and the time frame. And then what are the outputs from this project planning phase? You would have your brief requirement set at a very high level, and you'll also have your cost and benefit analysis that is done. And then okay, you have your outputs. What do you do next? You carry these outputs as inputs to your next phase. What is the next phase? The next phase is the requirements gathering and analysis phase. So this is going to be the most critical of your phases, because this is where your interaction about the product or the project itself starts. Here is where you try to iron out all the requirements with the design and implementation in view. So you have to always keep a view of what is going to happen next, so that you have your requirements gathering done to the best. Here you also try to gather every minute detail, like what is the hardware that the application is going to run on, what are the OS requirements, what is the security requirements, what's going to be the number of users for the application, what's the programming that needs to be used, are we going to develop it inside a microservices architecture, anything of such sorts. And then what are the inputs? So the outputs from the earlier phase are going to form as the inputs, and you will also through this time you'll also consider the NFRs, that is the non-functional requirements regarding your security or your performance. You'll try and gather through that information in your requirements gathering phase. You process all of that and you give your outputs. What are them? The outputs are system requirement specification and your business requirement specification. These will speak in depth into the requirement set, so that the next phase, that is the design phase, go very smoothly. So coming off into the design phase, so what do we do in the design phase? We have our requirements that are gathered. We know what is expected from the user. We do a technical study of all the material that we have gathered so far. We try and start designing the database and application architecture, so which would be the guiding point for the next phases, the implementation phases, when the developers actually start working on. So it is always a good thing. You can consider it as a pro tip, that it is always a good thing to have your design reviewed with your stakeholders. There is a good chance that your requirements, there is a chance that some of the requirements are missed and those requirements aren't met. And it is always good to have the design reviewed, so that you can have that subdued and clarified earlier in the cycles. And then quickly going on to the next, what is the inputs? So the outputs from the next old phase. So what are your outputs here? So you'll have your data flow diagram identified, your system architecture identified, and your unit test cases. What is a data flow diagram? So if you ask me, it speaks about how each module is communicating, how the front end is communicating with the back end. All those flow is clearly defined here. There will be multiple levels in data flow diagrams. I can plug in a reference for that for you, and you can definitely take a look into that. Okay, now we are done with our design. What's next? We start with the implementation. So the fancy word for coding. So here is when your development teams come into picture. They start implementing whatever is defined in the architecture, the DFT, and they have to adhere to everything that is written in the architecture, because NFRs being met is going to be very critical for you. For example, let's say your software product, the user expects it to respond inside 5 seconds. And if your product is responding in a minute, it is not going to be helpful for the end user. So you need to meet your NFRs. And development teams will also do unit testing in here. And so it is, it will be a basic test that will be run out at each test level. Okay. The inputs again are from the outputs of the earlier phase, and the outputs that we create here are the developed software. And you have your results from the unit testing that you have done on whatever you have developed so far. Then we go on to quality assurance stage after the implementation is completed. So now what happens in quality assurance? This is one of those fancy things these days, and we do have a lot of very important stuff going around in testing. If you go wrong with your testing, there is a good chance that you are going wrong with your entire application. So the quality assurance, as we just spoke about, it's going to be very critical. All the testers need to check whether the application adheres to the business requirements and the functional requirements that are already given by the end customers. They try and build test cases around positive and negative scenarios, and any of the defects that they are identified by the testing teams are going to sent back to the developers for fixing, and then retesting would be done to confirm this. Don't worry if your tester is creating a bug. It is always good to have bugs before it goes to production than after. Okay. And then finally, what are the outputs here? So we have your quality product, because you have tested it, you have ironed out all the defects that are there, and you have a very good quality product. And Please don't think that quality product means zero bugs. There can be bugs, but if the bugs are so feeble, or very with very less severity, like a alignment of text or something like that, it's not going to hurt the business or the basic functionality of it. You can live with those. But if the bug doesn't if the bug is in a space where the internet functionality itself is not working, then it's major. You're not going to consider that as a quality product. Okay, you have your test plans and test results that you have built here as other output. And then we go into the deployment phase. So what happens in the deployment phase? This is where you have your quality tested product. So after quality, during your testing, you can also do a UAT, and that UAT would basically ensure that your customer, the user, has agreed to that whatever has been developed, and now you have that handy, right? So now you're going into deployment. You're going to deploy your software into the production environment or in the client's environment. And here you need to keep in mind to have a final check that is performed before you do the deployment. Why do you need this final check? It is always good to have a final trial run with different sets of users, because your UAT may be performed by some experts who are looking at the application more functionally, and they may not have tested a small nitty-gritties, but those nitty-gritties may be identified by during your trial runs. And your trial runs also ensure that, because the application is running in a different environment than whatever it has been run, if there are any environmental issues, they should be ironed out first, right? So that's what your trial run ensures. So you have a trial run, and once that is done, you go ahead with your deployment. And here again, the inputs are from your quality tested software, and the outputs here form out the software product that is deployed in production. You'll have any minor defects that are identified during the user verification, that you'll have it. You should fix them immediately, as quickly as possible, and then you have your product deployment report. The product deployment report basically consists the information about how long it has taken to deploy the product, what are the environments it is deployed to, what are the servers specifically it is deployed to, and information like that. And then we go into the last phase, that is the maintenance phase. In maintenance, what are we going to do? So now the application is deployed to production, the users are using it. So here is where it does not end. Basically, it might feel like, okay, I'm in maintenance, so does that mean that it is completed? No, maintenance is a continuous process. You need to keep maintaining your application as long as you're going to use it. For example, your regular motor vehicles. If you're using a motor vehicle and if you're not servicing it regularly, you're basically hurting your motor vehicle, right? So it's always good to have that. And in here, remember, after your deployment is done, there will be an immediate hypercare that ensures, and that hypercare would have any major issues that are identified needs to be fixed immediately. If there are minor issues and the user can live with them, they'll be taken into a later point of time and for fixing. Okay, and during maintenance, it is always good to have all the servers in servers, or all the services that are involved, to be monitored, so that in case there are any issues that are identified before your production runs into them or sees those issues, it is good for software providers to immediately fix them. Okay, and again, what are the inputs? The inputs would come from the outputs of the earlier phase, which was the product deployment report, and your outputs are basically the real-time production issues that you get on a daily basis. During the maintenance phase, the leaderships connect to have a weekly and a monthly maintenance reports that are generated, so that the application information can be kept in mind. Okay, so today we have spoken about what is SDLC, the approaches and the stages. We'll talk about further what are all the different models that are there, what is waterfall, what is V-shaped model, what is Scrum, what is Agile, and all that in the upcoming videos. Thank you so much for your time today.